I had a totally wild experience yesterday, and I want to like revisit it, re-explore it, just like look at everything, look at all the details, the dynamics, and everything. More recently, I've been going through a lot of emotional pain for reasons that I'm not going to get into. Um, but last night, I was coming back home from work, and I just decided to turn my phone off and just disconnect from, my phone, from everything on my phone and everything, and just kind of like there was this phrase that kind of came into my mind, and the phrase was "go into the wound," right? And so what I ended up doing was I got back home and everything. I put in earplugs, and I kind of just like went into like a walking meditative state where I was just basically in a brief like hour I was revisiting my life. And I wasn't revisiting everything, but what I was revisiting was things that traumatized me starting very early on in life. And I'm not going to say what any of these things that traumatized me were. I'm also not going to name any names. I'm really not here to explore the things that happened or any names. What I'm here to explore is more so like the content of what was realized yesterday, which was very fascinating. So first and foremost, I want to explore going into the wound, right? Because what I've learned about myself is that, and I'll say this and make it very clear, because this was actually another phrase that came up while I was like in the meditative state and just like revisiting the past and stuff, really just, sitting with little Chris and being present with little Chris and loving little Chris. Which ends up being the key, the gateway back home, right? So the saying that ended up remaining consistent and present was, there is a wound of unworth, right? A wound of unworth, and it's creating unhealth. I'm a huge fan of looking at things like autopilot, right? When I say autopilot, I'm not referring to the mode that you put a car on, right, so that it drives. What I'm referring to is really in terms of like a human, right? Autopilot in terms of human lifestyle is basically doing the same. It's more or less like just living but being asleep, right? Like you're on autopilot. You're automatically doing things. You're not really present with it. You're not really thinking about it. You're just doing things, right? And so something that I've been learning about a lot over the past like year, maybe a little bit more than a year and a half or so, is a term in psychology. I believe that it may have been Freud that coined it, but repetition compulsion. So the tendency to compulsively repeat patterns that were learned from childhood. And when I say patterns, I specifically am referring to like things that you learned, right? Like whatever it is that traumatized you, you continue to act that out in your relationships later on. So like, for instance, if you were abandoned, right, you actually choose objects, meaning people, that are likely to abandon you and actually do abandon you, right? And so what I realized last night, let me look at the autopilot thing first, because I think that autopilot has a lot to do with repetition compulsion. We tend to do what is familiar, what is comfortable, right? We learn a way of living and we tend to just repeat that, right? So, in terms of like autopilot, I think it's really just repetition compulsion, right? You learn a belief of something, right? Maybe very early on in life, you learn a belief of unworthiness, right? And the fascinating thing about that too is that when a person learns a belief of unworthiness, if you believe in your heart that you are unworthy, you're not going to choose objects, meaning people, that make you believe that you are worthy because it doesn't match your belief system. You're going to choose objects, meaning people, that reinforce your belief of unworthiness, right? Unworthiness is tattooed on your fucking psyche. It's imprinted, it's hardwired in your mind. It is what you believe about yourself. You believe that you are unworthy. So therefore, you choose people, right? And I'm going to make a visual here real quick. Let's say the wound is right here. I think this is a pretty decent place to put the wound, right? The wound is unworthiness, right? It's generally close to the heart, right? There's a lot of meaning here. So there's a wound here, right? You're going to choose people and put them right here that reinforce that wound. And what are they going to do? They're going to eat away at it like parasites because they are a reinforcement of your belief of unworthiness. And unworthiness is not a healthy thing to believe about yourself because it's just not healthy. Not only is it not healthy, it's not accurate. But that doesn't change the fact that it is a belief and it is creating your experiences of life. And so let's now look at the just the phrase again. There is a wound of unworth and it's creating unhealth. So the wound of unworth creates unhealth, and you can say unworthiness, you can say unhealthiness. I'm just being simple here. Unworth, unhealth. So if you have a wound, a belief of unworth, right, unworthiness, you're going, like I was saying before, you're going to choose people that reinforce that. And you're not going to choose people that see you as worthy because that's just not your language. That doesn't make sense to you. You don't vibe with that, right? But this is the thing of repetition compulsion. You're compulsively repeating a pattern that makes sense to you, that is comfortable and familiar to you, that is unworthiness based on what it is that you learned very early on in life, right? But again, in terms of autopilot and repetition compulsion, it's just the same fucking thing over and over again. You're just choosing the same object that reinforces the same belief of unworthiness, which brings you to the same unhealthy circumstances over and over again, which has you choosing people that are not healthy for you, which has you making choices for yourself that lead to further unhealth for you, which leads to further unworthiness, which leads to further unhealth, which leads to further unworthiness. See what I'm saying? It's a pattern that just keeps playing itself out over and over again. And it doesn't change until and unless you see yourself differently, right? Like I was actually sitting with everything last night, and I was really sitting with little Chris, and Chris, little Chris is responsible, or I should say has been responsible for the repetition compulsion aspect of things, the continuing to choose objects, meaning people, that reinforce his belief of unworthiness, because worthiness is foreign to him. When a person learns beliefs of unworthiness from a very early age, that remains the projector there, right? So you chase, it's a pretty good, you know how they have things where it's like the person is on the treadmill and they're chasing something but they never get it, right? Crumbs of love and affection, right? Somebody who is unworthy believes that they don't deserve, they're not worthy of the whole pie. They're just worthy of whatever's left over, the crumbs and the little bits and pieces, right? In my own experiences, unworthiness is actually a challenging belief to get beyond. I do know that it is, I want to call it an illusion. I also want to call it nothing to do with me, because it doesn't have anything to do with me. The one of the most challenging things about growing and looking at yourself and healing is really understanding that whatever it is that fucked you up was never actually yours. You know, somebody else gave you a fucking hot potato that they couldn't handle, which is why they gave it to you, because it was fucking hot and it was really fucking uncomfortable to sit with, and they were like, unworthiness, take it. It's not mine. I don't want it anymore, you know? And then you're like, oh, what do I do? You know, like, and it's just like, you take a second, you realize it's actually, I mean, not to invalidate anybody, but like, you just kind of be present with it, and you're like, oh, this is not that hot actually, and this is not mine. Where the fuck did this come from? Grandma? Was this you? What the fuck? Great-grandmother? Great-grandparents? Great, forever and beyond? You know? Came from somewhere, but it's not yours, right? And like the actual like understanding and realizing of that is absolutely crucial, because a person can spend their entire life in low self-esteem believing that they're not worthy, right? It doesn't mean that it's true, but that belief drives their life, and they are likely to consistently, through repetition, compulsion, and comfort and familiarity, choose objects, meaning people, that reinforce that belief, keeping them trapped inside a prison of their own making until they wake up, right? And so it's like repetition, compulsion, and autopilot are so similar, because you're basically allowing a lesser evolved version of yourself, you know, the person that it happened to drive the fucking vehicle, right? And just be a fucking madman. Ah, fuck yeah, you know, like, you know, rather than just like, you know, realizing that the car has every fucking light in the book on the dashboard on, and that it's not sustainable. I mean, you can live your entire fucking life believing that you're unworthy. You absolutely can, and you'll continue to choose objects, meaning people, that reinforce that belief. But it's only until you realize, and by the way, just because you realize it doesn't mean that it actually changes. Like, you have to do the challenging work of choosing differently, which is very challenging. In my own experiences and opinion and feelings, it's very challenging. It's very challenging to kind of like look at everything and be like, okay, fine, I'm worthy, fine, now what? No, I don't want to choose people that actually respect me. That feels fucking weird, and I'd probably run away from them because I don't know how to act around people that respect me. Why? Because I've been so fucking disrespected and fucking violated by people throughout my entire life, I wouldn't know how to react. What would I do? Run away. Yeah. So, healing, changing as a person, I would argue, is very challenging. Because you're doing the opposite. You're not just doing the opposite of what you previously did. You're fucking living the opposite of what you previously did, right? And it sucks to admit that being abused feels right. Like, I can't believe I'm saying this right now. But, like, when you're so used to being abused and you're finally with somebody who, you know, doesn't abuse you. You know, years and years ago, I just remember being in relationships where I was abused by people. And I can imagine that I probably contributed to the abuse, and I enabled things. You know, there was a lot of unhealthy behavior, even on my end as well. But, like, actually stepping outside. Like, okay, I'll end off with this. There's a wound of unworth, and it is creating unhealth. So what do we do about it? We realize that the unworth came from somebody else. We feel the feelings. We put the energy on the necessary object, meaning person or people. The energy is probably anger. Okay. And you go from there, oh, so I'm not unworthy. No, you're not. Nobody really is unworthy. We all just carry around this belief that we are, and we continue to live that way, and we choose objects that reinforce that, right? So that gets that out of the way. So if you take care of that, then the unhealth gets resolved as well. The unhealth is the choosing objects, meaning people, that reinforce the belief of unworthiness, and they treat you like shit, and they abuse you and everything. And then it goes from there, right? But in my own experiences and my own honest opinion, that is challenging. It's challenging to choose differently. It's challenging to live differently. It's challenging to allow people in your life that actually care about you because you don't believe that you fucking deserve it, because you still have this fucking projector projecting this belief of unfucking worthiness, right? And so you probably look at the people in your life, you're like, what the fuck are these people doing here? Don't they see that I'm actually unworthy? They're probably going to leave me at some point. Maybe I shouldn't put too much energy or effort into the relationship. This, that, and the other. And then you fucking sabotage yourself, right? Yeah, this shit is hard. This shit is really difficult work. Doing the work on yourself, like actually healing, choosing differently, is fucking challenging. But that is me, says I, Chris. And at the end of the day, I suppose it is a lot better than what things used to be, you know? My relationships in the past really sucked. They really did. Years ago, it was fucking awful. It was totally fucking awful. Again, no names, none of that stuff, but I'm just grateful to be here healing and actually doing the work on myself.